Hey friends, welcome to the live Sample Ox Mystery Sample Challenge, where we will unravel a mystery product using our taste buds. Here's how it works. We have two guests on the program, a challenger and a category expert. Our challenger will be tasked with tasting and eventually guessing a mystery product from 3 different possible descriptions. They'll be joined by our expert guest who chose the product and in this case created it. And our expert's going to be guiding us through the tasting and giving out clues along the way. Today, our expert guest and beers come from a brand new brewery in Brooklyn called Endless Life. We're really excited to have them, and we're excited to have all of you joining in at home. Thank you guys for being here. So now if you are following along at home, you all have a 3-pack of beer from Endless Life. 2 of them were labeled, and 1 is the mystery beer. Make sure to log into Sample Ox right now and submit your tasting data for the mystery beer if you haven't already. We'll be using the leaderboard in Sample Ox to give away prizes, and you need to be a registered user to show up on the leaderboard and be eligible for said prizes. So go ahead and finish your tastings now. All right, so now let's go ahead and meet our participants. First, our moderator, Victoria. Victoria is coming to us from beautiful Bend, Oregon. She's a great human. She has a real talent for finding incredible secret dumpling and noodle spots all over Oregon and I guess the continental United States. She's a great dining buddy, so if you get a chance to eat food with her, you should definitely do it. Victoria, please say hi to our audience.
Hey, Lindsay. Hey, everyone. I'll be appearing periodically to give away prizes to those of you who tasted in Sample Ox, and I'll also be moderating the chat. So if you have any deep, dire questions for Jeff or our extra guests, drop them in there and I'll pass them along to Lindsay. Thanks, Lindsay.
Awesome. So now we have our expert panelist, Jeff Lyons. Jeff is from Endless Life, and he is the mastermind behind the beer we're going to be tasting today. And he'll be here to kind of guide us on our flavor journey as we try to figure out what the mystery beer is. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you wear a lot of hats when you're starting a brewery. We were just kind of talking about this briefly. What are you finding yourself doing most with your time these days?
Ordering taproom supplies. Totally unglamorous, you know. Of all the things that you could prioritize, it would probably end up at the very bottom when you're thinking about how great it would be to open a brewery. Yeah, makes sense.
It can't all be glamorous, I guess. So Jeff, I happen to know that you have a background also in the music industry as a DJ and a record store manager, as evidenced by all of the music behind you. I'm curious, what's one thing that's kind of surprisingly common to see in daily record store management life?
One thing that's common in daily record store life, I mean, it's probably very similar to what people that work front of house at a brewery or a tap room or a bar, a craft bar, deal with. I mean, just seeing the wide variety of people come through and just sort of finding that common strain, you know, just having conversations with everyday people. It's beautiful. I mean, that's
Yep.
sort of that was sort of the highlight for me anyways, as I was working at all the music retail, was just the interactions with the customers. And I find the same thing on the brewery side. Even when I was, you know, stuck in the back making beer, it was fun to wander out and have a beer with the people who were drinking the beers you were making. So you know, it's just a little more rewarding when you sort of are responsible for the whole thing start to finish.
Awesome. Yeah, love it. So it's just getting to connect with your community. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for being here. And now it is time to meet our challenger. Today's challenger is one of my favorite people, one of my best friends on the planet, Andrea Stanley. Andrea is the co-founder at Valley Malt and Ground Up Grain, where she spends her days both malting and milling. Andrea, thank you for being here tonight.
So good to be here, Lindsay. I look for any excuse to get to hang out. So this is great. And drink
This
beer.
is a good one.
Yeah.
So, of course. So, Andrea, you're quite well known in the craft malt world. In fact, you founded the Craft Maltsters Guild in 2013. Now you've kind of expanded from malt into the world of flour production with ground up grain. What got you interested in flour production, and what kind of overlap do you see between malting and milling?
Well, I mean, I fell in love with grain through malting, and that was about 10 years ago. And I think that what really got me into flour was thinking about another way to be able to be that middleman, to be able to help farmers that want to grow a crop be able to sell it to a local market. And we didn't have a miller in this area, and a baker that knew we had a malt house asked us if we would be willing to think about putting in a mill. And so that's kind of what got me into it. And, you know, the similarities are really pretty striking, because when you think about malt, you're really trying to break down starches that are naturally in a grain to make beer from. And with milling, we're also breaking down starches through a different process for bakers to be able to use. So it's kind of fun to think that, you know, even though there's two separate hats, both hats are providing this function of making starches from grains for people to consume.
So cool. Love it. All right. Another question. So you've been recognized by Fortune and Food and Wine magazines for being one of the most innovative women in food and drink. And one of the innovations that I got to see when I spent some time with you the fall of 2019 was this incredible heirloom corn variety that you were growing. This corn was probably no less than 15 or so feet tall. And there's a picture of it right there with you for scale. So I actually had you go back in there so that I could show how tall this corn was. So when we were talking about this internally at Draft Lab, the first question that we had was, how on earth do you harvest 15-foot corn?
With a machete?
You're serious, actually.
Yeah, I'm serious. The corn, we grew about half of an acre of it. It was in this beautiful field right on the Connecticut River for a friend of mine who is from Oaxaca, that lives in the Pioneer Valley where we are. And this seed he brought back from Oaxaca, and we just watched it grow. Unbelievable. I mean, you know, the stalks were like this big. And you saw how big it was. And yeah, there was no way that a combine, or at least our small combine, was going to be able to harvest that corn. So it ended up being a group effort of doing it by hand.
Yeah, we were just talking about the saying knee high by the 4th of July. And I'm sure you were like double overhead high by the 4th of July, right?
Yeah. Well, it was a little bit out of place, the corn, because it's used to being grown closer to the equator. And so to bring it up here to this latitude, it was like a little bit out of place. So I think partly why it grew so tall was it was just kind of out, you know, wondering what happened to its beautiful sun. But yeah, those are some, I'm so glad we got to share in that adventure together. That is one of the more exciting things, is when we have these fun, crazy projects with no real goal other than just to see what happens.
Yeah, well, we saw what happened. All right, well, thanks for being here, Andrea. So now let's go ahead and get into it. Now we know the flow, we've met our guests, so let's get going with our evaluation. So Andrea, go ahead and open up your beer, and you can start evaluating the visual aspects. And while you do that, at the end of our full evaluation, you're going to be tasked with guessing our mystery beer from 3 different descriptions. Now, if you're following along at home, please guess along with us. Put your guesses in the chat. I'm curious to see what you guys think. So as you evaluate, consider which of the following best describes our mystery beer. Is it number 1? At 6.2% ABV, this French Saison features floral and herbal flavors, a light body, and a moderately acidic finish. Or is it number 2? At 5.8% ABV, this mixed culture Saison has a notable fruity aroma with full body, and a dry, gentle, acidic finish? Or is it number 3? At 4.2% ABV, this table beer is a light-bodied beer that features moderate resinous and woody hop flavor and a moderately acidic finish. So there are some differences between those, but they're subtle. So it's a bit of a brain buster. So kind of pay attention to that. All right. So now that I've read all that, Andrea, you've probably had enough time to open your beer and look at it. So what did you notice about the beer visually?
Well, the beer has a nice, might even just get a little bit more light in here. It has a nice dark yellow color to it. It's slightly hazy, and it definitely has a nice carbonation. And,
all right, we'll get there. Thanks for the visual.
Sorry.
All right, cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump over you, but yeah, so we have like kind of a light beer. Looks like it had some nice foam. Jeff, can you hold it up? I think do you have it with you too? Yeah, nice. Yep. Has nice foam. And Andrea, nice glass. Very, very well played. So, all right. Andrea, is there any indication, do you think, of what malts he may have used in this beer?
I would probably say there's a little bit of wheat in here, and definitely for probably a base, maybe a lighter Pilsner type malt for a base. Those would be maybe my 2 guesses.
Was she right, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe there's some oats in there as well. Just to add to the mouthfeel and the body. Yeah, absolutely. Spot on.
Awesome.
With all the mixed firm beers that I'm doing, most of the clean side up to this point has been all of Ted's New York Craft Malt Excelsior Pils base. But on the mixed firm, I was trying to incorporate a bunch of 1886 along with Ted's stuff, thinking that we'd be building towards the future, and unfortunately, that's not so much the case. Now it's a sort of last standing relic of history kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good beer name, Last Standing Relic of History. All right, so before we move on to flavor, I want to kind of shake things up a little bit, kind of keep you on your toes. So let's play a little game, shall we? In addition to Andrea's day job, she is also a competitive arm wrestler, as you can tell by her guns. And we actually ran a Brewster's arm wrestling event for Craft Brewers Conference in 2018 and 2019. And we've just had a blast doing that. And Andrea's in that scene. And Jeff, music, of course, has always been a really big, important part of your life. And now as a brewer, you integrate music into your brands by utilizing song lyrics to name some of your beers, as you guys may have noticed. So knowing these 2 things about you guys, the game is as follows. I will read a song lyric from a WWE wrestler's intro, and you will be tasked with guessing which wrestler the song belongs to. You guys ready?
I'm totally ready.
Great. All right. Here's the first one. The first one is, sometimes I drink a little beer. Sometimes I make a little mess. Sometimes I get a little angry. And sometimes I kick a little ass. Is it A, Badass Billy Gunn? Or is it B, Stone Cold Steve Austin? Jeff, what is your answer, A or B?
I'm going to go with B.
All right. Andrea, what is your answer?
I'm thinking A.
Yeah, the Badass Billy Gunn. All right.
Yeah.
The correct answer in this case is actually Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's B. But don't worry, Andrea, there's going to be another opportunity for you to get one right. All right, this is number 2. This is the second one. All right, this goes as follows. I think I'm cute. I know I'm sexy. I've got the looks that drive the girls wild. I've got the moves that really move them. Is it A, the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, or is it B, Ravishing Rick Rude? Andrea.
I'm going A again.
All right, she's going A. And Jeff,
A.
you agree?
Yep.
You two are both correct. It is indeed the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. You guys know your wrestlers. This is great. All right, so Andrea, I want you to sit this one out because you know the answer. And Jeff, like I mentioned, we used to put on an all-ladies arm wrestling event at the CBC. Hopefully we can do it again in 2021, at least 2022. So all the wrestlers have their own biographical introduction. And so I'm going to read part of a wrestler's bio, and you will need to guess which wrestler it belongs to. So here's the intro. After years of agonizing sensory slavery, overexposure to dimethyl sulfide has produced within her a rage only satiated by the blood of her enemies. Is it A, Andrea the Grain Reaper Stanley, or is it B, Lindsay the Barbarian?
Oh, not fair. It could be either.
It could.
I'll go with B.
All right, Andrea, is he correct?
He's correct.
Yes,
You're correct.
he is
Lucky
correct.
guess.
It was a good guess. Woo! Well, that was fun. Okay, so now it's time for our first audience check-in. Victoria, what's going on with you in the audience? Are we having a good time yet?
Yeah, we're having some people join us in the chat. They have good questions, and they're talking about the beer and the wrestlers. I know I learned a lot about professional wrestlers just now, and a little bit of a peek into some more facts about Lindsay. But in sample walks, we're also agreeing with Andrea to say, yeah, it's pretty dark yellow, a low to medium haze, and then kind of having some fun with it. So I'm going to give away our first prize. And so this is going to be a flavor map from Draft Lab of your choice. So that includes things like whiskey and cheese and beer. And that first flavor map is going to go, this is randomly selected, but it is going to go to Pia. So congrats, Pia. I'll be reaching out to you so we can get in touch and send that your way. No questions left.
Nice
yet, Lindsay,
work.
but I'll send it back to you.
Great. Awesome. Nice work, Pia. All right. So no questions yet, but we are happy to take questions. But I am happy to go ahead and move on because I have a whole cache of questions for our two guests. All right. So Andrea, I'm sure you're ready to start evaluating the overall flavor of this beer. So go ahead and get started on aroma and overall flavor. And while you do that, Jeff, while Endless Life is your new brewery, you've been a professional brewer since a time where there were only 5 breweries in New York City. So how has the beer scene changed in New York, and how have those changes manifested in what you're up to at Endless Life?
The scene has changed incredibly. When it was a handful of breweries only, I think that sort of really forced the ground roots to be super, super strong. In that anybody who was really interested in craft beer and was home brewing, and was interested in making beer at any level, there were only so many breweries and so many jobs. So I think that just kept a lot of people home brewing, even if they would have maybe normally, if given more opportunity, may have moved into a commercial setting more quickly. And it just made so many incredible home brewers, and the back and forth with the information and the community was made so strong that once we started opening more commercial breweries, the network was so tight, the number of people who were so interconnected, it was an amazing community. And then we just started filling those positions slowly. And we got more and more breweries, and more of us home brewers went into those positions. And then some of the people, some of the breweries have been around for a year or two, all of a sudden we're hiring more and more people. It was just like round after round, and we'd absorb more people into the homebrew community. and then a couple years later they'd be ready to move in when a new brewery was expanding. And we've been able to maintain a really nice community in the commercial side, mostly based off of those roots from the homebrew side. So
Yeah.
it was really unfortunate that we were so small and so held back by the laws early on, how prohibitive they were.
Yep.
But once those floodgates opened, the people and the knowledge and the community was there to be able to really strongly move in and explode
Yeah.
without a bunch of shaky beers and shaky breweries. Like, there was a lot of thought put into it prior to that change, and that explosion was really strong.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it sounds a lot like just kind of the genesis of craft beer, with like a lot of home brewers coming to the scene and starting to graduate up to professional level, and that's just kind of never stopped in New York. It's just kind of been snowballed from there. So that's really cool to hear. All right, so Andrea, I would like to hear what you taste in this beer. So let's go ahead and bring her back. So Andrea, what did you experience? What were the aromas? What were the tastes in this beer?
Yeah, I mean, what I experience is, one of my favorite types of beer to enjoy. There's a really nice aroma that comes from from the yeast. I feel like there's some nice citrusy, lemon, orange aromas, almost a little bit of herbaceousness to it as well. And then I can also pick up just some malt aromas that are a little bit more like kind of that hay, grain, almost a little bit cereal. And dive into taste as well.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
So just the taste is, it just hits you as like a really nice balanced beer. There's a sweetness when you first taste it, but then the sort of acidity kind of just opens up your whole, back of your throat. And as it finishes, it's just a nice clean finish as well. And I really enjoy the mouthfeel of the beer. It has kind of a nice, not too heavy mouthfeel, and a nice level of carbonation as well.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds delicious. You're hired. Yeah, it sounds really good. So, all right. Speaking of malt and grains and such, Andrea, you are on the advisory board for the Northeast Grain Shed. And this organization is a network of grain growers and producers that are focused on increasing awareness and accessibility to local grains, as far as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So the local movement seems quite well established with veggies and meats, but grains are kind of new to me, and I'm sure new to many people. Are you kind of starting to see consumers prioritizing local when it comes to grains?
Yeah, I am, through obviously being somebody that sells flour to home bakers, and certainly during the early days of the pandemic and even continuing through now, you see a real resurgence in home baking. And I think that a lot of these home bakers are people that have already started to pay attention to other ingredients that they cook and bake with. And so I think this awareness that such a large part of our diet is grains, and sort of like, should we still accept this sort of, flour or other grain product that we don't really know where it necessarily comes from. And so if we care about things like local meat and dairy and vegetables, maybe we should also be caring about local grain as well. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of interest in it. And I think, as people become more aware of what they're eating, I think these questions start to come to the forefront of our awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all experienced that when we were scrambling to get flour early on.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeff, you also use the Northeast supply chain in your beers by sourcing New York ingredients. How has that decision kind of played a role in your objective of kind of building community with your business?
It's sort of all gone hand in hand. It's been really interesting. When I was, prior to getting a foot in the door on the commercial side, um, I was lucky enough to join the Brooklyn Bruisers, and one of the founders of the Bruisers, Chris Prout, used to drive up in his old blue beat up pickup truck and fill up on Valley Malt and bring it back down. And so there were actually a whole bunch of home brewers. Most of them are up in the northern Brooklyn side, up in Greenpoint and Williamsburg. But there were a whole bunch of us that were part of the Bruisers that were actually using Andrea's malt from the very early days. And so to me, almost as soon as I started brewing, at least part of my brewing was using local malt. New York grown grain that had to be moved outside of the state to be malted because she was so far ahead. Nobody in New York was malting at that point, and then just to ship the grain back to us. So it was a really, really cool thing, and it was really exciting and really fun to do that early on. And then it just sort of progressed from there. Ted Hawley at New York Craft Malt was the first New York maltster, I think since Prohibition, but definitely in for a couple decades. And he was just really good about coming down to the city and meeting us, coming to homebrew events, coming to see us. And so I was working at the Brooklyn Homebrew Shop, and we started carrying Ted's malt. And so it was just sort of one thing after another. All these things were put in my lap, and I just was lucky enough to be able to take advantage of them pretty early on. And then the relationships sort of came with that. So it was just a snowball of having access to the ingredients, using them, and being able to meet some of these folks. Sorry, Andrea, I got to know Ted a lot better than I ever got to know you, but I just see Andrea occasionally at conferences, but yeah.
Yeah, that's part of what's so great about beer. Like, that is kind of very much built on the community and kind of the ingredients, meeting the people behind it. All right. So speaking about our community, Victoria, what is going on with our little micro community? What's up with the audience?
Yeah, they have some really good questions. I think they love hearing about these ingredients specific to New York. And so that's been pretty fun. But we'll get to some of those questions in a second. They are saying a lot of notes in sample box about citrus, cereal, tropical, some stone fruits, that it's a little spicy and a little bit grassy. And we're also seeing notes about it being, low sweetness. There's not too much bitterness, a little bit of low sour. And so there's pretty good agreements on all these things. Again, we're going to give out another set of prizes to a randomly chosen person from our sample box flavor. This person's going to get to choose 4 flavor maps from the Draft Pod set. So there's all kinds of fun ones: coffee, chocolate, kind of whatever really you're interested in. And so this next one's going to go to T.O., and I'm going to be reaching out to you so we can get those headed your way soon. As far as questions go, Lindsay, we have some really fun ones. Let's go into, I have to choose one. Andrea, can you explain specific flavors of New York malts? They're saying as they brew with them here in Brooklyn, they see a lot of nutty, dusty, kind of grassy flavors. And we're just kind of curious what you think drives that flavor profile for New York malt.
Yes. So Andrea, what's your take on what's driving the New England malt flavor, and what makes it different than maybe what you would get in Washington or Colorado?
Well, I think that depending on the source of malt, you should be able to acquire local malt that kind of, especially like if we're talking about the Pilsner category of the beer that we're trying right now, I'm not catching any of those kind of like dusty or woody or I forget some of those other descriptors, but this seems like a nice clean Pilsner where if you're, sourcing grain that's been harvested properly and dried properly and stored properly, you as a maltster, you should be able to kind of, especially for a Pilsner, just work through that threshold where you want a little bit of grassiness, potentially like almost like a hay, like a dried hay kind of grassiness, but you don't want to get too far into the sort of more green and vegetal category. So sometimes it's just like each malt house kind of can put out its own, depending on how the temperature that they use to dry their malts. Sometimes it can leave behind certain flavors, and sometimes that's advantageous for certain styles of beer. I think that's one of the things that local maltsters can actually, really bring to the table, is this idea of a conversation with a brewer. I know that we make a malt that's called a wind malt. It's an old, I think it's from like the Netherlands, where or like the Belgian area, where they would dry the malt just with the air. And so then that means that you are leaving a lot of sort of those grassy hay type aromas, because they're not getting cured off in the drying process. And that can be great for certain beers, some Saisons, Berliner Weiss. So that's kind of fun to like have those conversations where, you're trying to make old historic varieties of malt or certain styles that you just wouldn't necessarily be able to call a larger maltster and ask for that kind of customization for your beers.
Yes.
I think that's one of these
question at all. But
I think that's one of the overarching things that appeals to me about, why I chose to use 100% New York ingredients is, half of it's the relationships with the growers and the maltsters and, the hop pelletizers, all of that. But, just the uniqueness of the grain and the full flavored, character that you can get out of these things that, for reasons good and bad, have sort of been bred out of some of the larger, supply chain, where just like macro beer, where they're sort of trying to aim for a more neutral flavor to appeal to a wider audience. We can sort of combat that by using more local everything, just an entire supply chain. I think you can get more flavor and more unique flavor and start to create different styles out of that.
Yeah, love it. So just like, those relationships allowing you to kind of really hone in on what it is you want to make, and having the ability to kind of tweak rather than having these big production facilities. So that's very cool. Good takes. So Andrea, we have come to our final modality, which is mouthfeel. So go ahead and take some time to evaluate the consistency of the beer. And while you do that, Jeff, without giving it away too much, can you name one of the more maybe esoteric brewing tricks that you use to achieve the flavor of this beer?
Everything we do on the mixed fermentation side, mixed fermentation being multiple different strains of yeast, and to me, if I use that word, it means yeast and bacteria. So I have a number of different cultures, mixed fermentations, mixed cultures that I've been using for a number of years at home, that I've put together through a little bit of spontaneous experimentation at home, and a lot of bottle drags, and using commercial strains and sort of mutating them over repeated use, and then combining things. So there's a few different things that I have banked at Bootleg Biology. Thanks to them, they kind of give me a nice comfort level of like, if I take this too far or if I really mess something up, I always feel like I have a reset to go back to, where I can order from them and start again. But everything I do on the mix side is, multiple different mixed cultures that I've been working with for years. Each one of those sort of provides unique pros and cons, a different flavor profile when used sort of in their own mixed culture, but sometimes combining multiple mixed cultures to try to take a little from A and a little from B to try to guide things where you'd really ideally like to end up. So I don't
Yeah.
want to go too specific, otherwise I'm gonna throw the whole game out.
Yeah, very cool. So essentially, this is a really unique beer. This is something that you can't just like go buy the culture from, like Y Yeast or whatever. So really cool that you're using that kind of creativity to do that. So let's go ahead and bring Andrea back, and I want to hear about what feels you got. What were the kind of mouth feels that you experienced with this beer?
Yeah, so initially, I think what hits you is the carbonation level, which I think this beer has a fairly high carbonation level, maybe moderate to high. And so it kind of gets your mouth tingling a little bit, or at least it gets my mouth tingling a little bit. And so I think it allows for more aromas to kind of develop in your retronasal passages. And yeah, I did notice some sweetness up front, and the mouthfeel being kind of like a medium. It's not like light like a lager, but kind of like a medium mouthfeel. And then the finish is, kind of just nice and clean. You take a swallow and it leaves you with a little bit more aromas, a little bit more citrus aromas, but, kind of leaves your mouth without feeling too sweet or cloying.
Yeah, awesome. Beautifully described. All right, so now we've kind of got a full picture of what this beer looks like, smells like, tastes like, feels like, all the things. So before Andrea takes her final guess, let's go back to Victoria to ask what's going on with the audience, do our final check-in.
Thanks, Lindsay. So the audience is having fun. They're loving learning more about the malts and things like that. Also in sample ox, they're getting that medium to high carbonation, a little bit of alcohol, medium body, a little bit drying, and I think we're really liking it. And so I'm going to give away our grand prize. So that's going to be a $25 gift card to Endless Life, and then some sample ox swag. And this is going to go to do one last refresh to make sure that there's no other ones coming in. Looks like right now that's going to go to George with a score of 5250. So congratulations, George. I think I remember you from last time. I'll be reaching out to get prizes headed your way. And then we have one more question for Andrea, not quite so beer related, but since she's kind of a flour expert, people want to know the keys to a sourdough starter, and if there's a specific malt or type of flour that you would recommend for keeping those starters happy.
What do you think, Andrea?
Well,
we've talked about this a bit.
We have. Oh, it's such a good question. I find that people like to feed their sourdough starter something that's easy, right? So if you already have an all-purpose flour or a bread flour or a flour that you use on a regular basis, just use that flour. And if it's a fresh flour, your sourdough is going to be even happier. Our light rye, which is a variety called Danko, which comes from Poland, but has actually been introduced into the New York State area. And over the last 10 years, Danko rye has become pretty much the only rye that we malt and mill. It has a lot of flavor. It's very plump. It has a lot of starch. And it seems to really make keeping your sourdough happy easy. But Lindsay, I know you talk to your sourdough. So what does your sourdough tell you?
Yeah, we're fighting now currently, but it's okay. We're gonna get over it. Yeah, my sourdough normally is just kind of an all-purpose kind of gal. That's just all she needs. I've actually never given her any Danko rye though, but I have some here, so maybe I'll try to do that. Maybe she'll stop being so angry with me. So I'll let you know how that goes. It's a good question, and I think a lot of people have different answers to it. So, but yeah, I never thought to feed it rye. So it'll probably change the color of it a little bit, probably make it a little darker. But that's fine. All right, so now comes the time for us to put this all together and guess which of the three descriptions best matches the flavor of the beer that we just described. So Andrea, I'll ask you in a minute, but first I'm going to refresh your memory with what these three possible descriptions could be. So is it number one, at 6.2%, this French Saison features floral and herbal flavors, light body, and a moderately acidic finish? Or at 5.8% ABV, this mixed culture Saison has notable fruity aromas with a full body and a dry, gentle, acidic finish? Or at 4.2%, this table beer is light-bodied and features moderate resinous and woody hop flavor and moderate acidic finish? Okay, Andrea, talk us through what you're thinking. What do you think it is?
Okay, so let's just say we're on House Hunters International right now. I'm just going to take 3 out of the running. Or okay. 3 or C.
Get it out.
Whatever that is. It's out of the running.
3.
I'm going to go with 2.
All right. We're going to go with 2. The 5.8%.
The aromas were, I was going to go with A, but then once I heard the description of 2, you know, because like the citrus, the Saison, like I could see it being a French Saison, but now that I'm like enjoying it a little bit more, I think, and listening to, you know, potentially the hints that you may have dropped, I think that it might be number 2.
Yes, that's the point. So Jeff, please reveal what the mystery beer is and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I actually have a bottle that I'm drinking, so I can lift it up. Yeah, you're totally right.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, just what it says. It's a pretty straightforward mixed culture Saison as far as I'm concerned. The way that I have had to go about making some of the beers so far, I'm making most of the beer, or at least the wort, at Keg and Lantern, my day job, and at some point putting them in kegs and bringing them back into the tap room. I have a bunch of puncheons and wine barrels down in the basement. So some of that has come through, but this Saison actually didn't go through wood, so it was just straight through without touching wood. I have half of this batch in a puncheon right now, so we'll see where that goes. But yeah, it's just pretty straightforward. I did so I'm putting these in 10-barrel totes, like sort of cubes, like plastic cubes, beverage cubes, and I did a number of beers in succession, and I tried to go sort of from like simple cultures to more complex cultures, and just continued to add more culture in, but leave the previous culture. I'd drain the beer off and leave the culture, the dregs at the bottom. Sort of as a home brewer, you'd leave that yeast cake at the bottom of a carboy, but then put a new beer on top of that, a new wort on top of that, but then add more culture to guide it in a different direction in each iteration. And I'm actually tasting today. I feel like when I'm drinking it in the tap room on draft, it's pretty clean and concise, and like a Saison, it really reads as a Saison. The bottle that I opened, I don't know if Andrea, you're tasting this as well. I'm getting more of like the lambic culture that I have, the more spontaneous, a little bit more complex than I would have wanted or expected, intended for a Saison. And it's a little bit more of like a full-on sour culture going on in the sample that I have. I'm meandering a bit, sorry.
No, it's great. Yeah, it sounds really great, and that's like the fun of, you know, doing mixed culture beers. Like you really don't know which little guy is going to win, which bacteria or which yeast is going to win, and so you get a lot of like unique variation. So I love that. All right, so can you talk maybe a little bit about kind of the challenges of doing like both mixed culture beers and clean beers in a brewery? What kind of thoughts do you have on kind of maintaining both of those sides of your business?
I mean, to me, it's really important to have both sides. I love both sides of that, but even on the clean side, I mean, to me, the through point is sort of the yeast character. I even though I'd say half of the business is, clean or, lager centric, even on the lager side, I'm wanting esters. I'm wanting to do pretty quick turn lagers to try to keep a lot of that fresh flavor and a lot of that yeast character really present. So to me, I think, the underlying theme is to be sort of like a yeast centric brewery, a yeast forward brewery, even on something
Yeah.
like a lager, which would normally read like no flavor, no character, try to lager out all of the yeast character. I really like a super fresh lager and having a little bit of yeast esters and a little bit of like fresh yeast character in there. So that's sort of how I tie the two together in my head, and that's sort of the main focus and the main thrust of the brewery is to be sort of yeast forward. I love featuring local grains and I love featuring local hops, and I think those are super, super important. But to me, the biggest piece of all of that, with water being the fourth corner of that, I just think of all of those things. I think the yeast is the most important, and the always going to be the forward point in almost all the beers we make.
Yeah, it's what keeps the breweries going, and it's a really unique take as well. There are very few breweries that I think are kind of highlighting and showcasing what yeast can do for flavor. So it's really cool, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in the world of yeast. So as we kind of wrap up, I wanted to ask you guys both a question, and we'll probably kick it back over to Victoria as well to see if there's any other questions from our audience. But for both of you guys, you two are both very focused on building community. Jeff, you kind of intentionally built the brewery where you built it to kind of build up that community. And Andrea, of course, we talked about your work with the Grain Shed and your various other projects. So how are you guys framing what community means for you and your businesses as we come out of this pandemic in 2021? Andrea, do you want to kick us off with that answer?
Oh, gosh. I think community to me always feels like, your locale, right? So you're sharing some kind of sense of place. And the fact that we're enhancing that sense of place by making sure that agriculture is a part of the conversation. To me, that feels like community. To me, community is about, supporting those basic things in life, like our food and our housing and those those sustaining things, to me, are things that communities share. And so, yeah, when I think about our businesses, we're really in such a wonderful space in that we've really we've established our sandbox, and it's local. And so it's like we are allowed to just play in that sandbox. And that's our community. Our community is our sandbox that we get to enjoy the good and the bad and everything with. And I guess that's how I'm looking at it today. It's a really great question, though, because it's hard, because community has been hard because of the pandemic. So much of our community is about being in person. And so the pandemic has really scarred a lot of that ability to be in person with people and connect in person to strengthen community. So yeah, it's an interesting time for that concept of community.
Absolutely. And Jeff, we were talking about this offline right before this and kind of asking the question about how you're building your space. You started building your space about a year ago. And so how has that kind of shifted for you, knowing kind of how our kind of dynamic has changed, in 2021?
It just prohibited every which way that over the past, 8 or 9 years that I've been brewing and thinking one day I'll open a brewery, and everything that I really look forward to, in the month leading up to that opening date and those early, opening parties, like all the preview parties, just bringing everybody in the doors and packing everybody in and just having really incredible times. Like it all goes out the window. And so in that way, I'm at a complete loss. All I want to do is bring all my friends and the whole industry in and then have a friends and family night and then just plaster the neighborhood and get everybody that lives within a few blocks in the door and drinking beer and meeting each other and sort of seeing each other in a different light. And that's just all on pause. Like we'll do that in 6 months or a year and it'll be crazy when it'll be great. But you just sort of have to go about it in a different way and try to build a little bit virtually, try to build a little bit through social online forums and go about it that way and just rely on everything you've built up to this point, up to a year ago and hope that sort of gets you through to the point where we can meet in person. But
Awesome.
that being said, we've had an incredible response from the neighbors. Having a lot of beer in package and having people come in and sit in, safe, socially distanced ways. We have a backyard, so having people come in and take part in that. But even if they're just coming in and picking up beer to go, being able to just have those face-to-face conversations, it's sort of like planting little seeds on a much smaller, slower scale than we anticipated. But you can still do it. It's just slower and more methodical and agonizingly. It's always something in your way.
Yep.
We'll get there.
Well, you mentioned just doing a lot of online stuff and trying to kind of like build it from a distance. And I think this was just part of it. So I really appreciate both of you guys being here. That's kind of part of our intent with doing these challenges and connecting with those of you in the chat as well and in the community. So speaking of the chat, Victoria, we'll go back to you one more time to see if there are any last burning questions for our two guests.
Sounds great. Thanks, Lindsay. Jeff, this is specific for you, actually. I'm curious, what's your favorite barrel, or is there a barrel you're really looking forward to aging some of these beers in? It sounds like that's another part of the passion with those mixed cultures. So if you have one that you've worked with previously that's a favorite, if there's something you're looking forward to working with in the future.
That's a great question. I would love to address that in like 2 or 3 years. And once we start putting multiple beers through barrels and see what each of them sort of provide and how they handle different types of beers. Everything that we're doing with Endless Life is super brand new. All the punch-ins, all the wine barrels, everything is new to us. So everything we're tasting is the first beer that went through each of those. So it's at this point an impossible question, but we're definitely pretty excited about a lot that's coming out. So I'm really excited to see 2, 3 years from now, after you put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beers through, each of those barrels will probably start to show you what the character of that they're going to provide, and then it becomes really fun. Then it becomes, if you know what you're going to get out of a barrel, then you start to create beers and wort specific to that, to sort of play off of the strengths of that barrel, and then then the doors become wide open. You start to really move in new directions.
Love it. It's such an exhilarating thing to be in the early kind of learning stages and figuring out what you want the flavors to look like in the future. So thank you guys both for being here. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, but I also want to hear from both of you guys what you want to plug. I know you guys have a bunch of other stuff going on. Jeff, of course, I know that you probably want to plug your brewery, but is there anything else that our audience should know about? Any social handles and whatnot?
No, I mean, I would love to see everybody come to the brewery. I'd love to meet you guys, and I'd love to have a beer with you and see what you're interested in. Talk beer with everybody. But I'd also encourage everybody. You know, I feel like there's a pretty homebrew centric audience here, and I mean, I'm still a hugely plugged into that locally, and know many of the people viewing because of that. And anybody that's new to that, I would just encourage them to seek out a local homebrew scene, find your local homebrew club. That's the best way to find great people and learn about beer and flavor and fermentation. Yeah.
Awesome. Andrea, what do you have going on? What do you want our audience to know about?
There's not a lot going on that I can plug because I'm like an events person. I love events, and there's not a lot of events right now. But just plugging, the Northeast Grain Shed, and this idea of just like, if you're somebody that cares about local food and local food systems and the land that we live on here in the Northeast, just, to check out any kind of local food source that you can, because I think that's the future.
Can I plus one?
Awesome.
The Northeast Grain Shed. It's been beautiful to watch that kind of go from an idea into being fleshed out and become a reality. It's pretty cool and pretty positive. So thanks for your work on that leadership.
Thanks for your work on the commitment
cool
to
thing.
local grains, because it's really special and really unique. So way to go.
You guys are both great. It's so much fun to have this conversation with both of you, and your commitment to your communities is just so very cool. And of course, it was a great time talking about wrestlers and tasting beer. So as always, really lovely seeing you guys. And for all of you guys at home, this summer we are going to be doing a bunch of live, in-person, and virtual events. So stay tuned to what we have coming up by following us on our social media channels. Also, please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more of this content, and keep tasting in Sampleox to continue building your palate while supporting local breweries and engaging with your community. Thanks again, and happy tasting.